Join Rob Farley and I as he takes us through a new feature in Azure SQL DB and shows us how easy it is to call REST endpoints from T-SQL on the next episode of Data Exposed MVP Edition. Join Rob Farley and I as he teaches us about a new Azure SQL DB feature, calling REST endpoints from T-SQL. Hi, I'm your guest host, Ree Merritt, and welcome to this episode of Data Exposed MVP Edition. Today, I'm joined by Rob Farley, a data platform MVP since 2006. Let's get started, Rob, by telling me what you do.
Yeah, hi, Ree, and thanks for having me on the show today. As you say, I'm a SQL MVP from Adelaide in Australia, and yeah, I feel like in November there was a lot of stuff happening. We saw SQL 2022 reach general availability, which of course is fantastic. But I want to talk to you today about a thing which I think a lot of people might have missed hearing about just because it wasn't part of the SQL 2022 release. It was something separate that so far is only available in Azure SQL DB, but which I think is quite possibly a bit of a game changer about the way that we architect systems, the way that we design workflows and ETL processes and the like. And that thing is the ability to call REST endpoints from within T-SQL directly. Instead of having to return control to a PowerShell thing or a data factory thing or some other process, we can now just call those REST endpoints straight from within T-SQL.
So sounds great, Rob. Looking forward to seeing what you've got.
So as part of my setup, what I've done, I've gone into Power BI. I've created a streaming data set, as you can see here. Just something very simple. The idea being able to demonstrate that you can push data to somewhere. This talk is not trying to explain how all of this stuff works, but what I want to show you here is that if I go to the API info page for this data set, I can see that it gives me a URL and it shows me what the payload should look like in JSON format. We're going to hold on to that. And what I've also done is I've created a dashboard to show me that information live. So here's the dashboard. You can see it's currently showing a gauge that's looking at 0 on a range from 0 to 100. I'm going to basically use this like a bit of a status bar to show how things are going midway through a long-running store procedure. Anyway, let's jump into Management Studio now. I'm going to show you that like calling this store procedure. Here's some sample stuff. I'm declaring a variable for my payload, and I'm populating that with a piece of JSON. Now, I don't like trying to write JSON, all the different types of brackets and everything like that come into play. I would rather just create it using T-SQL. And you can see here what I'm doing. I've got a list of values that I'm aliasing to the names that as they were in that page on the Power BI site. And I'm just calling for JSON path here. And that's going to convert it all for me. If I just run that section, you'll see it creates something that is valid JSON in the right kind of format for passing in to my API endpoint. Anyway, I'm going to drop that into that variable called payload, and then I'm just going to call SP invoke external REST endpoint, as you can see here. I'm passing in the URL that it gave me before through Power BI. I'm telling it to use the post method. All the standard methods, post, get, update, delete, etc., are supported. There's a response. I could be exploring that response, but actually at the moment I'm just interested in pushing data to it. Maybe that's for another day. And if I run this, you'll see that it runs and it pushes a value of 0 through. Now 0 was what we were already showing, but let me show you what I'm really wanting to do with this. Now I've created, let's just switch to another window. I've created a store procedure here called push to PBI stream. It's the idea here is that I don't need to think about what the details of making that call. I'm just going to have a store procedure that I can pass some values into, and it's going to do the work for me. I've got the comments at the top here of it that remind me what the format and so on is, but really I've just got that code that I had from the other window. I'm just using variables instead of constants there. Okay, I'm using constants for the min and the max because I want to have a nice status bar that always goes from 0 to 100. The rest is all variables though. So having got this store procedure to be able to do that work for me, and you can in fact see some of the code that I could use to explore that response if I care to, but I'm not doing that here today. I can then have a long-running procedure, and I can basically do some work. Here I'm just doing waiting for 5 seconds, but you can imagine doing a whole bunch of work. And in between, like at the start, I'm going to push a value of 0. Halfway through, I'm going to push a value of 50. And at the end, I'm going to push a value of 100 to be able to give those updates to my data set. Now, this might be more complex logging than this. This might be actually calling functional pieces of code. But the point is here to be able to demonstrate I can be doing this within a long-running store procedure. I'm sure you can all imagine those times that you've had a long process that needs to run inside SQL Server, or I say SQL Server, any SQL environment, that you end up breaking up into extra sections because of the stuff that you want to do in between. Now you can probably do that stuff in between without having to leave your store procedure. It's very, very handy. So let me kick off this long-running procedure and switch to the Power BI window. So run, switch to the Power BI window, and you can see it's on 0. It's gone to 50. We're halfway there, and there we go. We're now on 100. Fantastic. We can see that our long-running procedure has made these calls. We can see the response. We can see stuff happening.
That's really interesting, Rob. Quick question for you. Is there a limit to how quickly you can push these calls through?
Yeah, that's a great question, Ray. This is a synchronous call. It's not asynchronous. So the procedure was having to wait for that call to finish before it could move on. And there is a limit to how much we can push into this. Now, there is a specific error code that comes back if you've reached the limit of how much you can be pushing through. I don't mean size of the payload. I mean frequency of the calls. The system is limited to 10% of the available threads, or to a maximum of 150. But all of this is documented. There's in the help page. If I switch back to Edge, switch to this tab here, you'll see that this is the standard Microsoft Learn page about this function. And if I scroll down, there's a section on throttling here that explains all of this and tells me what those fantastic codes are that we can then detect and figure out if we should retry. But on the whole, I would say, look, don't be trying to push tons and tons of stuff through this. Look for where it's appropriate and convenient and so on to be doing it. This is not trying to replace an IoT system and so on that's designed to scale massively and so on. This is designed for being able to avoid having to switch contexts quite so much. If you've got some some things that are pushing data into event hubs or whatever, still use them. But I totally see this as being a scenario where, well, let me quickly diagram this for you. I can see this being a thing where we've got a flow or whatever of data, maybe in Data Factory or something like that, and we've got something which calls the database, and then we have to wait for that to come back, and then we have to go to the next step in our flow in our Data Factory, and then we can make an API call. And then when that's come back, we can then go to something else, which is calling another database thing, and so on. And of course, needing to work out what's happening with our transactions and so on. And I'm saying that this could become a whole lot simpler now, because maybe we don't need all of this stuff here, because shouldn't have got rid of the API bit. Because if that's an API, we can now have that called within there. That can then return back to that, and then we can carry on once all of that has happened, instead of having to come back just to be able to make the API call.
That's great, Rob. So what APIs can you call with this? Is there a limit, or can you call anything that you like?
Another good question, Ray. Thanks for that. So the being able to say which, what are the things we can call? Well, back on that, switching back to Edge again, if I look further up in this, further up than the throttling, but not quite at the top, here, there's a list of what APIs we can call. You can see there's a lot of them are Azure. Here's one that the one that I was using, the Power BI bit. But you see at the bottom of the list, it says API management, and there's a note here that says if the thing that you're trying to call is not in this list, wrap it up in API management within Azure, and then just call it through that wrapper layer, and then you can call what you like. It's really convenient that way. Trying to go into the details of API management and so on, that's another section again. We definitely don't have time for that. And in fact, look, I think I'm going to invite the listeners and so on to be able to explore this and to imagine what the things are that they could end up doing with this in a much simpler way than they have done before, because they don't need to keep doing that context switching piece.
Thanks for talking with us today about calling REST endpoints from T-SQL, Rob.
No worries, you're welcome, Ree.
Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. And thanks to all of you for tuning in. You can find links and more details in the description below, and we will see all of you on the next episode of Data Exposed MVP Edition.